Bashar Assad's dictatorship literally ceased to exist in just a few days. The rebel squads are already in Damascus, and the dictator himself might have died in an aviation accident while he was still in the Syrian capital. In order to gain complete control over the city of Damascus, the rebels needed just a few days, while the civil war in the region of Syria lasted more than 10 years. The reason for the fall of the dictatorial regime, and we're not just talking about personal dictatorship, but rather the regime of the so-called Arab Socialist Ba'ath Party, established in Syria in 1963, was the weakening of the regime's sponsors' positions. Assad's regime was literally propped up by the bayonets of Iran, the Russian Federation, and terrorist groups linked to Tehran and Moscow. In recent years, all these forces have suffered significant losses and have focused on new challenges. For the Russian Federation, today the main war is in Ukraine. And each of us sees this when we watch the missile strikes in our areas, the flights of drones, and the movement of Russian troops on our territory, as we witness the devastating impact and consequences of these actions, which are a constant reminder of the ongoing conflict and its effects on our daily lives. For Russian President Vladimir Putin, the victory over Ukraine and the strengthening of Russia's positions in the post-Soviet space have become not just a priority, but a psychopathic fixation. And in this situation, there are significant forces. For Russia, it was just a task that it couldn't accomplish. Well, before that, it seems to me that in Moscow, they just didn't realize that Bashar Assad's regime was unable to control the situation in the country. Now, Russia can control the situation to lose its own military bases in Syria and thus get rid of any influence in the Mediterranean, which had already diminished after the start of its war with Ukraine and the closure of Turkish territory to Russian naval forces. Iran faces serious issues, focusing on its conflict with Israel and launching direct missile strikes, receiving retaliatory strikes. Tehran needed to strengthen its presence in Syria and Lebanon, assisting Hezbollah. Despite threats to defend Assad's regime, Iran's influence in Syria has diminished and its embassy in Damascus was destroyed by rebels. In this situation, of course, it was essential for Tehran to strengthen its presence in Syria, especially amid military actions in Lebanon, where the Iranians were trying to assist the terrorist organization Hezbollah. This was a necessary decision for Tehran, as we have seen, even though they threatened that the Iranian army would defend Bashar Assad's regime. Now, Iran's influence in Syria has significantly diminished, and its embassy in Damascus has literally been destroyed. The rebels, who know exactly whose bayonets the criminal regime relied on. Well, and the terrorist organization Hezbollah. In fact, the Syrians owe their liberation to Israel. That's exactly why the Jewish state over the last 500 days has literally destroyed the capabilities of those gangs that terrorized not only the Israelis, but also the Syrians. The entire political and military leadership of Hezbollah, led by the notorious Hassan, has been wiped out. A large number of Hezbollah fighters have been sent to hell or taken out of action for a long time as a result of unprecedented operations involving the sabotage of radios and pagers. And Israel's operations against Hezbollah continue, so that nothing is left of the personnel of this terrorist organization. So there's nothing left not only in Lebanon, but also Syria. Of course, Hezbollah's leadership was not able to do anything in this situation to help Bashar Assad maintain his power in any significant way. And at the first signs that the rebels were gaining the upper hand over the dictatorial regime, Hezbollah's units were sent to Lebanon. The Iraqi shot units that also helped Iran in its fight against the Syrian opposition. They decided this time not to intervene in the situation, clearly assessing its hopelessness. And the leadership of Iraq said that it would not intervene in the Syrian internal conflict. And so Bashar Assad, who just a few days ago flew to Moscow to defend his son's dissertation, named after another despicable Syrian dictator, the longtime ally of the USSR, Hafez Assad, has simply vanished into thin air, and no one knows the fate of one of the most crooked dictators of the 21st century, a loyal friend of the bandits Vladimir Putin and Ayatollah Khamenei. However, now, of course, the question will arise about how the situation in Syria will develop further. Undoubtedly, the beneficiary of this situation is the President of the Republic of Turkey, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, who has helped the Syrian opposition in its fight against the regime. However, the Turkish Republic does not control all opposition forces, only part of which is oriented towards Ankara. The ones that absolutely and completely disagree with Turkish influence are, especially and particularly, the Kurdish armies, who fully realize that as a result of the increase in Turkish influence, Syria could resemble that country itself and its serious conflict in the areas of Kurdish settlement. There's a question of how the Syrian opposition, where the forces are largely connected to the Sunni majority, will be able to find common ground with the national minorities in Syria. Paradoxically, the Arab Socialist Renaissance Party has relied on religious minorities like the Alawites, from which the Assad family emerged, even rewriting the Syrian constitution for the sake of power, or the Christians, who have already faced significant tensions during the early period of the Syrian civil war, when they were literally driven out of their hometowns by opposition factions from Islamist groups. Syria can either start its path toward democracy and understanding among the different groups that inhabit this country, or it could plunge into the horrors of a new civil war without any centralized authority. It could turn into a territory of chaos and devastation. Considering the previous experiences in Arab countries, where dictatorial regimes have been in power for many decades, we can confidently say that this is the kind of scenario that Syria might face in the near future, or the establishment of a new, equally brutal dictatorship, but with different supporters and different backers. How will the situation develop? We certainly don't know yet. The Middle East is not a region where you can seriously talk about stability. But now, it needs to be warned that the criminal dictatorial regime, which has committed atrocities against its own population, has suffered a significant defeat. We can state that this victory is simultaneously a victory for the President of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin, and the leader of the theocratic regime in Iran, Ayatollah Khamenei. And they might think again that in any confrontation with the West, even when it comes to Turkey, which is a NATO member, they are strategically losing and cannot win. This is another important detail. It's a detail of the situation that's currently being observed in the Syrian conflict. Thirdly, both Russia and Iran are losing their military capabilities in the Mediterranean region, which can be taken advantage of, not only by Turkey, but also by Israel, which is already closely monitoring the situation in the Golan Heights. Fourthly, the United States has a chance to become a security sponsor in the region if it can properly assess all the challenges posed by the rapid erosion of Bashar Assad's regime. And this is already being mentioned by the elected President of the United States, Donald Trump. Thirdly, the insecurity of a new major conflict situation in Syria, which in turn could engulf neighboring countries like Lebanon and Iraq, could create new opportunities for even greater instability with unpredictable outcomes. And now both Tehran and Moscow will be working towards that kind of chaos to take their revenge. This is also a completely realistic development of events, especially if we remember how the situation developed in other countries that have already experienced the forgotten Arab Spring. So everything is just beginning, and we will still be witnesses of the hoarding and dramatic tricks at the Blisky Skod and in Syria, Zokrima. The decline of the dictatorship means that a holy day begins, after which, as you can see, a new darkness always sets in. And the task of those who realistically assess the situation is to do everything possible to prevent that darkness, even if it seems absolutely impossible. Thank you, friends. Stay tuned to this channel, subscribe to it, follow me on my social media, and check out my channels on Patreon, Buy Me a Coffee, and Donatello, which help support these projects. Use the sponsorship feature on YouTube itself. Victory and peace to you. Good luck.